Okay, so in this video, there's a lot going on, so I thought it might be easier to just do a little voiceover and kind of explain the steps. Like all projects, it usually starts by putting together some panels. And you can see here's a few design iterations we went through. Originally started with the more traditional sort of classical style, but I was actually short on material, so I kind of come up with some ways to simplify it. As I didn't want to go get more because COVID-19 was going on, so it's actually ended up being a good thing. I think the final design's much better than the first one. Here we've rough cut out the legs and I'm marking the depths of the chamfers that I want to put on them. And here I'm just showing real quick that when it comes to holding down pieces, you can trace them out on some scrap plywood and cut them out, and it does a really good job if you don't have hold downs or anything. This would be a lot faster with a table saw or bandsaw. Once we check the fit, I use dowels to reinforce the joint of the legs. So here you can see me making the mortise for the stretcher. All four legs need a mortise, either through one or partial through one, because they all work off of the same stretcher. And you'll see the leg assembly in a little bit.
Because so much advertising has been put behind them and exposure, one of the examples I like to use is like, okay, you're driving through LA, you see a billboard for a movie, it'll have the laurel leaves, around the award that it's won. Well,
Nice.
Once we got the front legs put together, I could lay it out on the table to mark out the rear legs, make sure that I cut them at the right angle and had the right look. Here I'm actually making a small mistake. I'm marking out the through tenon, but in the wrong orientation, which luckily I realized before I completely cut it out. But basically mark it out, drill out the corners, and then use a coping saw to get rid of the bulk of the material, and then a chisel to clean it up. And there you can see the back legs are slid onto the stretcher and are getting ready to glue it up. Back legs are actually not glued right now, they're just slid through. We'll wait till everything else is glued to put them in their final spot and put just a little bit of glue. They're tight fits, so they don't need much. And I use dowels to reinforce the mortises at the end.
And then cleaned that up good, put a bonding primer on it,
And while it's
painted it.
drying, I can use my drywall square there to mark the top legs for where they need to be cut so that they're even with the back legs. And I also took this time to reinforce the bottom joints because those are going to be covered, so I just drilled some dowels in there. And this is a look at the leg assembly, which makes up the bulk of the cabinet. The cabinet's pretty simple construction. It's basically two side walls with a wine rack as a top piece that holds everything together. So I used the offcuts from the top shelf to make the wine rack. And I used a wine bottle to get the spacing right, make sure that we had a full number of spaces and that they didn't fall through. And here you can see we're gluing and clamping them using some spacer blocks to keep them all even. And so that's really the cabinet. Just checking it for square. It was about a 1/16 off, but I can fix that when I route out the dados in the bottom shelf. Since there's going to be a lot of lateral forces on these, I reinforced everything with screws from underneath. And here I'm setting on top of the bottom shelf to mark out the dados because I want to have it recessed slightly into the surface. Once we get the dados done, we have to square off the ends. And here I'm just giving everything a quick sand before we glue it up. Always makes it easier to sand as you go, as much as you can anyway. And here you can see I'm lining up and getting ready to attach the bottom shelf and cabinet, which is now one piece, to the leg assembly. And I'm just using some glue on the base legs to make that happen. And now that the base cabinet's in and it's secure, I can cut this back support to size and glue it and clamp it as well. I was going back in time here real quick to show that before I put the base cabinet on, I used it to mark out the door and cut it down to size. And then here I'm attaching drawer slides so that I can mark out the dados that I need to route in the back side of the door, because I want it to sit flush with the front. And here's where we're routing out the slot for the slides on the back side of the doors. And here routing the finger pulls on the front of the doors. Now I'm marking and cutting down the top shelf to size. Everything at a 10-degree angle, so we tapered them back at 10 degrees and had the saw set to 10 degrees. So gives it a little more interesting look than we just do everything at 90. Now I'm getting ready to make the wine rack, so I'm just making sure I've got enough space. And marking everything out. And the way I did this is I route the 2 channels out and then cut them into 3 pieces. So the middle piece kind of looks like a T, and then the outsides are like 2 L's. And when they get attached to the underside of the top shelf, they'll become racks for the wine glasses. And here I'm just testing it out real quick and making sure that there's clearance between the bottom of the glass and what will be the shelf, so it can slide free. And then I just need to clean it up and sand it down so it doesn't scratch anything, lay it out, and attach it. Since these are hidden, I use screws and no glue in case we need to move them at any point because we didn't get the widths or spacing or something right. And then the sanding. Once everything's cleaned up, apply 3 coats of teak oil, and I finished the top not attached. Just made everything a lot easier, and you could really do a good job on the top since that's the most visible part. I don't know if I said it, but this is walnut and ambrosia maple. And to attach the top, I just put some glue on the back stringer and drove a couple of screws in from underneath. So it's just attached on one side, so if there's any movement, it shouldn't be a problem. And there's the final look.